There is a repeating rhythm in world history, a predictable sequence that has wiped out three dominant empires over the past 5 centuries. And right now, in the year 2025, the United States is moving through that exact same sequence, step by step, policy by policy, almost as if we are reenacting the same storyline that brought every previous superpower to its knees. In the late 1500s, Spain stood as the wealthiest and most powerful force on the planet. They controlled nearly half of the world's gold and silver. Their armies shaped the balance of power in Europe. Their currency traveled the globe as a trusted medium of trade. Yet within roughly 8 decades, that glittering empire went bankrupt, sliding into second-tier status and never climbing back. Then, in the year 1914, Britain commanded the largest empire humanity had ever witnessed. Their territories stretched across the world, so vast that people said the sun never set on British soil. The pound sterling acted as the global reserve currency. And still, in less than 4 decades, the empire shattered. Their currency destabilized. Their dominance evaporated. They became the junior partner to the rising American giant. And in 1991, the Soviet Union, the other major superpower of the 20th century, dissolved in under 1,000 days. Not from invasion, not from nuclear war, but from internal economic collapse so severe that the entire state structure disintegrated. 3 empires, 3 total downfalls, and disturbingly, all 3 followed the same ordered progression from supremacy to destruction. Which brings us to what should truly concern you. The United States has already moved through 5 of the 7 stages. We are not drifting toward the pattern. We are already inside it. This is the story of how empires actually die, why they always think they are the exception, and why the cold arithmetic says the United States is sliding toward the same fate, faster than anyone is willing to acknowledge. Before examining the pattern itself, you need to understand what the downfall of an empire looks like in real life, not in academic theories, but in lived reality. Empires do not begin collapsing when enemy armies storm their borders. Collapse starts long before that, from within, through a kind of economic exhaustion. A point arrives where the empire has stretched itself beyond what it can realistically sustain. Military outposts across the globe, multi-front commitments, financial obligations it cannot meet, debts that multiply faster than the resources needed to repay them. At first, the decline hides beneath the surface. The currency still circulates. The military still wins battles. Politicians still proclaim strength. But behind the curtain, the load-bearing structure begins to fracture. Wealth is misallocated, productive industries shrink, talent exits, competence erodes, then the slide speeds up. Allies begin hedging their bets. Rivals push boundaries. Trade partners look for alternatives. Confidence in the reserve currency dims. And suddenly, what were once strategic advantages turn into liabilities. A global currency becomes a torrent of capital returning home. A sprawling military becomes financially impossible to support. International promises become empty statements no one believes. This is not hypothetical. Spain lived it. Britain lived it. The Soviet Union lived it. All for the same reasons. Unshakable faith in their permanence, overextension abroad, deterioration of their currencies, and refusal to confront reality until collapse was already unstoppable. So let's break down how this cycle unfolded each time, starting with the world's first true global empire, Spain, in the 1500s and 1600s. This is where the blueprint originated. After Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, Spain rapidly transformed into a global powerhouse. They conquered the Aztec and Inca civilizations and tapped into the richest silver and gold deposits humanity had ever discovered. By the mid-1500s, Spanish galleons delivered hundreds of tons of silver to Europe every single year. By the turn of the century, these shipments doubled. At that point, Spain effectively controlled Europe's money supply. Their currency, the Spanish real, became the world's preferred medium of exchange. Everyone sought Spanish silver, and this is precisely where the downward trajectory began, with a nation that controlled the world's money and believed that privilege guaranteed invincibility. Under King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, Spain possessed unimaginable resources and spent them aggressively in pursuit of empire. Stage 1: military overextension. Spain plunged into conflicts across continents. In the Mediterranean against the Ottomans, across Italy and France, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England's navy, and in overseas territories stretching from the Americas to Asia. By the year 1580, Spain was fighting in 4 separate regions at the same time. Half of the empire's revenue disappeared into military spending, yet even that wasn't enough. Stage 2: currency debasement. Tax revenue couldn't sustain Spain's ambitions, so the monarchy did what failing empires always do. They diluted their money. Copper was mixed into silver coins, reducing real value while keeping face value unchanged. Over time, these coins carried so little silver that merchants refused them at full worth. Inflation surged. Stage 3: the debt spiral. Spain relied heavily on loans from foreign bankers, but the borrowing never stopped. By 1557, Spain defaulted. Then again in 1560. again in 1575, and again in 1596. 4 defaults in 4 decades, each followed by more borrowing. Stage 4 collapse of productive capacity. With endless wealth arriving from the Americas, Spain's own industries deteriorated. Why grow crops, innovate, or build when foreign goods could be purchased with easy silver? Manufacturing died, agriculture stagnated, and when the mines began to yield less silver, the entire economic engine sputtered out. By the early 1700s, Spain was a hollow empire, a giant on paper but empty inside. Now, move forward roughly 3 centuries to the British Empire, the global titan of the 1900s, the empire that claimed a quarter of the planet's surface and hundreds of millions of people under its authority. London was the financial heart of the world. The pound sterling functioned as the reserve currency just as universally as the Spanish real had centuries earlier. And just like Spain, Britain assumed its status was unshakable. Yet beneath the confidence, the same cycle was already unfolding. Stage 1 military overextension. By the dawn of the 20th century, Britain was obligated to defend an enormous web of territories: India, regions throughout Africa, swaths of the Middle East, China, the Pacific, and various strategic islands and ports across the Caribbean. Holding this colossal footprint required garrisons, fleets, and constant readiness. The strain was monumental. Then came World War I in 1914. Britain faced a decision: remain neutral and preserve its empire, or enter the war and gamble everything. They chose to fight, a choice that cost them over $40 billion at the time, which translates to more than $1 trillion in modern value. Britain borrowed aggressively, mostly from the United States, and by the end of the war, the creditor had become the debtor. But they believed victory preserved their status. They believed they could recover. They believed the empire could endure. They were mistaken. Stage 2 currency debasement. The pound sterling was anchored to gold, but the war drained Britain's gold reserves. Shipments of gold were sent to the United States in exchange for essential supplies. By 1920, Britain's gold stores had nearly halved compared to their pre-war level. Nevertheless, in 1925, Britain attempted to reattach the pound to gold at its old pre-war value, a value far too high. The overvalued pound made British exports expensive and uncompetitive. Factories closed, unemployment soared, and interest rates had to stay painfully high to defend the currency. The domestic economy suffocated. By 1931, the illusion finally collapsed. Britain abandoned the gold standard, and the pound instantly lost a quarter of its value. The world's reserve currency admitted it could no longer keep its promise. Stage 3 debt spiral. Britain never recovered from the crushing debt of World War I, and then came World War II. Another mountain of borrowing. Another wave of dependence on American lenders. By 1945, Britain owed more than its entire economic output, and the empire could no longer be sustained. Stage 4 loss of empire. In 1947, Britain surrendered control of India, the empire's most valuable possession and a cornerstone of British global power. Over the next 2 decades, one territory after another slipped away: African colonies, Middle Eastern holdings, islands across the Caribbean and Pacific. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in history books. Stage 5 currency decline. The pound continued its downward slide for decades. What had once been the monetary foundation of global trade devolved into a regional currency. Britain maintained symbolic power, nuclear weapons, a permanent United Nations Security Council seat, a special relationship with the United States. But the world understood the truth. Britain was a former superpower coasting on the legacy of a vanished empire. And so the cycle completed once again. Different century, different culture, same pattern. Now shift to the late 20th century, to the Soviet Union, a colossus that emerged from the ashes of World War II with nuclear capability, unmatched tank divisions, vast land holdings, and ideological ambition stretching across continents. At its peak, the USSR believed it represented humanity's future. But behind the military parades and propaganda was an economy that had already begun to rot. Stage 1 military overextension. The Soviet Union poured between 15 and 20% of its GDP into military buildup, triple the American share. They tried to match the United States in global influence, funding allies and client states across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. They occupied Afghanistan. They bankrolled Cuba. They supported regimes in Vietnam, Syria, Angola, Ethiopia, and North Korea. But the Soviet economy was too weak to carry a global burden this heavy. Stage 2 economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy effectively stopped growing. Oil exports kept the system alive, but everything else crumbled. Farm output collapsed. Factories produced obsolete goods. Innovation froze under central planning. By the 1980s, the USSR, a nation with some of the world's richest farmland, was importing grain just to keep its population fed. Stage 3 currency breakdown. The ruble was never trusted. Even citizens preferred dollars in black market trades. Money only functioned because the government forced its use. Internationally, no one wanted rubles, only Soviet oil, gold, or raw materials. When global oil prices fell, the USSR's financial lifeline snapped. Stage 4 loss of empire. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and the Eastern Bloc disintegrated almost overnight. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and East Germany all broke away. The Soviet sphere evaporated, and Moscow lacked the economic power to stop it. Stage 5 complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union vanished. A superpower possessing tens of thousands of nuclear warheads collapsed internally. No invasion, no external destruction. Just financial implosion, the same pattern once again. And here is the chilling part. The United States is now following these same steps, one by one. Now we arrive at the present. Let's walk through the stages again, this time applied to the United States. Stage 1, military overextension. America maintains over 750 bases across roughly 80 countries, with troops in around 150 nations. We guarantee Europe's defense through NATO, back Japan, support South Korea, anchor the Philippines, patrol the Middle East, counter China, monitor Russia, and maintain a global presence larger than any military force in human history. Our yearly defense budget is roughly $850 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. And somehow it still is not enough. Equipment ages, recruitment declines, logistics strain. If multiple crises erupted simultaneously, China striking Taiwan, Russia testing NATO borders, Iran disrupting the Persian Gulf, America cannot respond to all of them at once. This is the precise definition of overextension. Stage 2, currency debasement. In 1971, the dollar fully detached from gold, becoming pure fiat. Since the year 2000, the money supply has expanded by hundreds of percent. Since 2020 alone, trillions have been created from nothing. The dollar has lost almost all its purchasing power since leaving the gold standard. The method is different from Spain mixing copper with silver, but the effect is identical. The currency weakens. Confidence erodes. Stage 3, the debt spiral. America's national debt has soared far above its GDP. Interest payments alone approach levels that exceed the entire defense budget. The government now borrows money simply to pay interest on previous borrowing. The textbook definition of a debt spiral. Spain lived this. Britain lived this. The Soviet Union lived this. Now America is living it. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. The United States has slowly outsourced manufacturing for decades. Much of the industrial base, steel, electronics, pharmaceuticals, even critical military components, now comes from foreign supply chains. The US runs enormous trade deficits every year. Just as Spain grew dependent on imported goods while exporting silver, America grows dependent on imported goods while exporting dollars. And the moment global demand for dollars fades, the consequences will be severe. Stage 5, social decay. Institutional trust sits at historic lows. Urban disorder spreads, homelessness grows. Addiction ravages communities. Political divisions harden. Fertility declines. Confidence in governance evaporates. The culture fragments. These are the social symptoms that appear in every empire's late stage decline. And here is the crucial point. The United States has already checked off 5 of the 7 stages. The same point at which Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union either collapsed rapidly or lost global dominance forever. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This has not fully happened yet, but early signs are unmistakable. BRICS nations seek alternatives. China and Russia trade using their own currencies. Saudi Arabia has begun accepting yuan for oil. Central banks accumulate gold rather than dollars. When enough nations diversify away from the dollar, the tidal wave of dollars returning home will spark the crisis. Stage 7, collapse. This stage is not slow, not gentle. Not a graceful retirement from global leadership. It is sudden and violent. A rapid breakdown triggered by a currency crisis, followed by a debt crisis, followed by political dysfunction. The Soviet Union collapsed in under 1,000 days. Britain lost its empire in about 2 decades. Spain unraveled over a century. Different timelines, same outcome. Every empire believed it was immune. Every empire believed it was exceptional. Every empire believed it could bend the pattern. Each was wrong. Today, America repeats the same reassurances. We're different. We have technology. We have the dollar. We are America. But the pattern does not care about patriotism or optimism. It is mathematical. When the fundamental stages are completed, the outcome follows. Could the United States break the cycle? Perhaps. Maybe reforms will take hold. Maybe the nation will rebuild manufacturing, stabilize its currency, reduce its commitments, and restore cohesion. Maybe this time is different. History, however, doubts it. And if you want to understand what happens as stages 6 and 7 unfold, the reserve currency eroding, the financial system shaking, and the empire entering freefall, subscribe. Because when the moment arrives, the key to understanding the future won't be found in predictions. It will be found in the past.